preparing for?
We're reviewing The Bloody Inn today. The Bloody Inn is a 2 to 4 player tableau and hand management game set in the bleak 19th century French countryside. As a broke innkeeper, you decide to turn to a life of crime to make ends meet. However, you're ethically against just robbing your guests, as that would put them in the same predicament that you find yourself in. So instead, you murder your guests and rob their corpses. Throughout the game, players recruit accomplices to help them in their sinister murders and build additional annexes under which to bury their amassing body count. At the end of the game, the player who's amassed the most wealth and likely killed and buried the most bodies will win the game.
The goal of Bloody Inn is to have the most money at the end of the game. Money is a combination of the checks you have on hand and the cash you have in your pocket. Unfortunately, the cash you can have in pocket never can exceed 40 francs, so throughout the game you're going to have to launder money into checks in order to continue making profits.
At the beginning of each round, star player passes. The new star player places 8 new guests, 1 into each guest room around the table. Strategically, the goal of this is to place guests into your own rooms that are likely to stick around, and guests into opponents' rooms that are likely to be recruited or murdered.
This guy is definitely getting killed. Before we get into the actions, it's important to understand that every card can serve multiple purposes, and that the cost of interacting with the card is based on the value listed,
which ranges from 0 to 3.
The grocer, for instance, which is a 3, if you were to bribe or kill him, requires you to discard 3 cards. If later you were then to use him to build something or bury him, that would require you to discard an additional 3 cards.
Every round, each player takes 1 action, starting with the starting player, and moves around the table. Then each player takes a second action. This is composed of some combination of the following actions.
Option 1, bribe a guest. You can bribe a guest from the inn by discarding the appropriate number of cards from your hand. Alternatively, you can recruit 2 peasants from the bistro. Cards that are now in your hand can be used to pay for future actions or to be built into annexes.
Option 2, build an annex. Place a card face up in front of you from your hand and discard the appropriate number of cards. Annexes serve 2 purposes. First, you can bury bodies under them up to the value of the card, and they also give you some sort of special bonus or ability for the remainder of the game.
Option 3, kill a guest from the inn. Murderize somebody by discarding the appropriate number of cards from your hand. Take that body and put it face down in front of you.
Bleh.
Keep in mind that you can't actually collect the money from this person as you haven't given them a proper burial.
Option 4, bury a corpse. So now that you have a corpse in front of you, you can bury it under an annex. And once again, pay the appropriate number of cards.
I think they get this rule by now.
Yeah. So now you've successfully robbed a corpse, and you can collect the profit equal to the franc amount printed on the card.
What happens if I don't have any more room for other bodies?
Well, you can always bury a corpse under an opponent's annex.
Ah.
However, when you do this, you have to split the profit with that opponent.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's important to note that for these preceding 4 actions, certain accomplices are good at completing certain tasks. What this means is that when you use those accomplices, the card actually comes back into your hand instead of going to the discard pile.
For example, newsboys and representatives are really good at bribing guests.
Cards like the Mechanic or the Cultivator are terribly good at building annexes.
Unsurprisingly, cops are really good at killing people.
And folks of the religious persuasion are good at burying them.
And lastly, peasants and nobles really have no special abilities. The last action option is to launder money. Throughout the game, you can only have up to 40 francs in your wallet at any given time, but you're likely going to earn more than that as you kill people and steal their money. So this action allows you to convert the francs that you have on hand into checks in increments of 10.
At the end of the game, any police officers that have not been killed or recruited into your circus of evil that are sitting in the inn actually perform a police investigation. This can be problematic if you have unburied corpses that are lying on your front lawn. Fortunately, a creepy Stephen King-style gravedigger will come by to remove that corpse, but he'll also take one of your checks for doing so.
After the police investigation, any guests that remain in the inn, who haven't been recruited or killed, will pay for a legitimate night stay in the inn to the appropriate innkeeper. This is a measly 1 franc that you gain from this, so you can see why we turn to a life of crime.
Yeah, not only that, but you actually have to pay every one of your accomplices 1 franc at the end of the turn. If you can't afford to do so, they'll leave you.
The game ends when you've gone through the guest deck twice, and at this point, the player with the most money, both in checks and in currency on hand, will win the game.
Okay, Squid, interaction.
Yeah, so, this game on the surface, I think the interaction is fairly low, right? Like, you're kind of building your own engine and working in that sort of Euro style.
Sure.
But I think where the interaction comes into play is that you all are working from this common source of information as well as common resources, which are basically what guests are out. And so sometimes that influences your choices or thinking through what you're doing. Like, you can choose to, for example, not kill or recruit police officers if that's gonna, if some of the other people have unburied corpses and things like that. So there's kind of these low levels of interaction that can happen.
Yeah, you're taking 2 actions in a turn. You really can't plan too far beyond that because there's not enough really information to go off of there. And so my first action, I need to think about what is everybody else going to do. But by the time it hits my second action, I kind of am just going to either execute my plan if it was still available or have to audible into something else. And that is sort of where most of it comes into play. But I agree with you that it's pretty low on that side.
And I just want to add to that that you really do have to think about your 2 actions at the beginning and think about what your other players are likely going to be doing. Because if you make an action choice, I'm thinking largely if you're dealing with corpses, is really where this comes up. Yeah. You need to be really thoughtful if you're going to have time to do that, if you're going to be able to do what you need to do, or if the other players are somehow going to make choices that are going to make that harder for you. So it's much more kind of envisioning what other people are going to do and less about that direct interaction.
The one bit of interaction I actually really do like in this game is the burying the bodies under other people's houses. If you're very, very crafty about it, you can wait until they're kind of capped out on their wallet and then be like, okay, let's split this. And then they really get nothing for it. But generally, then you only get half as well. So, that's got to be part of your game plan somehow.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, well, what do you think about the theme of this game?
Knocks it out of the park. I mean, you and I were drawn to this game originally because of the theme and the sort of the weirdness of it, and it works every time. It's sort of a bizarre idea, but every time I say to somebody, hey, do you want to play a game where we don't rob people, but we have no problems taking money off their corpses, people are like, yeah, I'm on board. Like, it just works every time.
Yeah.
And, the art in this game really, really matches up with that. This is sort of like surreal, bizarre version of people. My personal favorite being the extremely corpulent brewer, who just looks like this sick, grotesque figure. And it all just works very well together.
Yeah, I agree. And my favorite way that the theme is integrated, honestly, throughout this game, besides just the fun, overarching way that we kill, are all of the characters, and the fact that there's different, they have different professions and specialties, and that this kind of plays into what they're good at and what they're not. I think that's really nifty, and there's kind of a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor in that. My favorite for sure is all of the religious figures and how they are where you bury bodies are really good at that. Priest is my favorite. He looks very much like he could be in The Godfather or something, and he makes everybody's good at burying corpses. And while it seems like a little strange at first, you can make that story in your head for why that is, and it is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, and then the cards build on that story, right? If I want to get rid of that brigadier chief because I have bodies in front of me, am I going to shoot that guy, or am I going to be like, hey, why don't you come kill some people with me? Yeah. And so you build your own little hilarious sort of dialogues, vignettes almost from that.
Totally.
Okay, Squid, time to talk about mechanisms.
Yeah, I think that this is a really beautiful and elegant game. I mean, we kind of talk through really quickly kind of what your action choices are, and there really aren't a lot of choices, but it becomes much more complex than you think it's going to be as it gets moving, and there are a lot of moving parts, and you have to have so many steps to get to the point of killing bodies and burying them and getting their money. And so there tends to be a lot more strategy than you anticipate.
Yeah, I tend to prefer games that are a little bit deeper, and so I did not have high expectations when I started, but actually the two actions that you have per turn, the fact that you constantly have to be paying wages, is something that you really need to pay a lot of attention to. There's a lot of kind of liquidity issues in this game of when certain actions are efficient or inefficient, and that makes for actually some really fun, kind of provocative moments where you have to decide what to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really funny because it's really easy for you to get really excited about building certain parts of your engine or thinking that you're on a good track and having things spiral out of control. So I'm infamous in this game for just really being into the killing, and I'll start, I recruit a lot of police officers early, and then I start killing, but I didn't really focus on building up my annexes, or, I don't have the numbers of people to discard to kill, and so I end up with all of these bodies, and then I just have to keep killing police officers. They don't catch me, and it spirals out of control very quickly, but rarely has that been frustrating in a non-fun way for me. Like, it's always hilarious, and I find that it's always hilarious around the table when that starts happening with people.
Yeah, you made the comment about it being like an engine. I kind of view it as like a mini engine building game. Mm-hmm. I've played a couple games where, like, I'm infamous in games for I want to build the crazy engine that does something weird, and every time I've done that, the game has just ended before I expected it to. But I have done some cool things where I'm like, oh, this game I'm going mostly for a building strategy, and I'm putting a lot of nobles into play that are giving me money that way. And so you actually can not focus on killing in this game and still do respectably, but the game is short enough that you really kind of need to get the money when you can.
Mm-hmm, definitely. The other thing that I really want to mention is, in general, I think the learning curve of this game is pretty low. Like, I think it's really easy to teach new people. The one thing that I've seen come up, and in particular for people who haven't played a lot of board games or card-based board games, are confusion over the cards themselves. So the fact that they play different roles depending on how you're using them. The biggest thing that I've seen come up is people, when they've recruited somebody into their hand, they think that they have access to the annex power, which is listed on the bottom, which you don't get until you play it down. And so that's something that I've had to teach new players. I think it just happens with the style of game. Like, you see it in Last Will as well. I find that it takes a game or two for people to understand how to read the cards correctly and what they're doing. And then once they get it, it all moves really quickly and makes sense.
Yeah, just any game like that where you suddenly get it because of what the cards make sense. Let's talk also a little bit about the end of the game and the scoring that happens there. It's pretty easy, right? You just count up the points that you have on the board, you add the checks, and that's it. I mean, it takes a moment. Your score is 80, my score is 76, game over. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of the buildings that give you endgame bonus points or endgame money, really, and I'm not a big fan of those personally. I just don't know that they mesh super well with the idea of the game of this like flow of cash at the end, because it is, like I said, I feel like it's a game of small edges, and I like that. But they almost never come up because they're really expensive to build.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've rarely seen them come up in a game, so they're present, but I don't think it's much of an issue. And I do find that the scores generally reflect how well this mini engine, as you call it, is built by the people and how much they focus on having all of the steps in place and getting the bodies, killed and being able to wander at the right time and stuff. I find that they are pretty reflective, though in general the game tends to be really tight, so it seems really tense up at the end.
Yeah, we've played a lot of games where end scores were like 78, 79, 80, and then you ask yourself, like, was there a turn where I paid one extra wage that I didn't really need to?
Except for those games when I spend all of my time killing and then have to pay the grade figure a ton of money at the end.
Sometimes you just lose.
So it goes. So what about novelty and replayability for this game?
Yeah, I'm going to skip straight to replayability and talk about the fact that because of that mini engine concept that I introduced before, this game has a lot of replayability. I want to play and I want to figure out, can I get 2 or 3 of these cards as my annexes and make a strategy out of that? You can even make an engine out of just one card. If I get the brewer, for instance, who I've mentioned before, he's like, get a bunch of drunk peasants in here. Now we've got 4 peasants instead of 2, and they can go do your murdering for you. Mm-hmm. And so, it's fun to look at that and say, I'm going to try that next time.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself at the end of a game, even, like, as we're finishing up, thinking about what I want to try next time. What combination of cards, what sort of setup, which is a pretty good sign.
Yeah, definitely. This game has mechanisms that feel similar to other games in terms of the novelty aspect. Like, discarding cards out of your hand. That's a race for the galaxy thing. That's nothing that's necessarily new. But the fact that you have to pay for your cards at the end of your turn is something that is different. It actually changes the dynamics and the valuation of that a lot.
Mm-hmm. I would also add to that, one of the things that I find is one of the more stressful parts of this game, and is unique, is how much energy you need to spend in just even having cards in your hand to pay for things. It takes up way more than you think it's going to take of your actions throughout the game to like keep hoarding things to be able to buy them, and that really changes the dynamic as well.
Yeah, not only that, but at the beginning of the game, you start with $5 and you're like, great, I have $5, but you pay wages, and all of a sudden you're broke. Mm-hmm. You need to get money right off the bat, otherwise you're in trouble. In fact, the whole liquidity thing in this game I think is really fantastic. If I get up to $30-something, I suddenly have to start asking myself, when can I take that action to break my tempo and sort of cash out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because that mechanism really ties to, I would think, like certain worker placement games, things like Sulkin or Manhattan Project, where part of your strategy is figuring out when you can take your pause and pull your guys off the board, or if you are going to be kind of screwed because now you have no workers left and you can't do anything. It's the same sort of thing. If you can't get more money, it's only so much you can do, and you have to work in that pause in the most effective way possible.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before, but I'm personally impressed by how much they really managed to do in like just a card game. I mean, there's this board here, but all this is a tracker for my money.
Mm-hmm. Which again, like it's nice, right? Because that brings down the price point of the game. It's really easy to set up. I mean, one thing also is it's a pretty short game.
Yeah.
I mean, we can play in an hour, which is great when you're teaching new players. It's great if you're having a game day or you have people that don't have a lot of time. That does tend to bring it to the table more often. We also just didn't talk about the most obvious thing, which is the novelty of the theme, and how fun it is, and I think the way that all of the theme is integrated with the mechanisms is really fun, and I think is really, really novel.
Yeah, and I mean, oftentimes people are going to the game store and they're saying to themselves, I am looking for a game about French countryside murder, and
yeah,
finally,
totally.
it's there.
Finally,
right?
yeah.
That's happening.
Yeah, but it works.
Absolutely. Hey, Squid.
Oh, hey, Whale. So, what do you think? Bloody In.
Yeah, this is a great game. It's one that we have been playing a bunch. We've played it 2-player, we've played it 4-player, and it's fun. It's just a good game. There's enough strategy in it that as a hardcore gamer, you can feel like you are making some interesting decisions, but you're not playing a hardcore game. You can introduce it to new people. Mm-hmm. So it's a really enjoyable game.
Yeah, I obviously agree. This is one of my favorites, if not my favorite game that we bring to the table right now. I love it. It's quick, easy to show to people. The artwork is always fun. Coming up with new strategies is always fun. I think, for people that are looking for a game, there's always kind of that breakdown in people who want something more strategic versus somebody that wants something that's lighter and has more random elements. So it is worth noting with this game that the order of the cards, the way the guests come out, is going to be that random element that is going to shape it. So you're never going to have like a long-term strategy in this game.
Yeah, I personally think that more comes down to the game is more tactical rather than strategic. Like, there is randomness, and you could like have a plan to just not pan out because of the way that the guests come out. But oftentimes you're just like, okay, well, what can I do that is best right here? Because generally you're like, well, I'm going to be killing somebody, so it's at least okay, even if it's not the most efficient. But speaking of efficiency in this game, there is kind of, if you get knocked out early, if you make an error early, particularly about getting a body, confiscated, caught up in a police investigation, like, there is almost no recovery.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing with it being pretty tight, and I think if you are a new player with this game, who's not used to the flow of it, and especially if you're playing with people who have played before, that can be frustrating, because you really are going to need a nice game group that's going to stop you from making some bad choices. But once you kind of get the flow of the game, there's always going to be something for you to do. And even if you make some catastrophic decision, it's not like in some of these games where then you are literally just sitting there with nothing to do. There's always something that you can do, and you're still taking actions, you're still doing things, you're just not going to win.
Yeah, and so, I mean, all that, we're basically making the argument that people who are light or heavy strategy gamers will like this game. But honestly, the one thing that you're really going to care about is if you enjoy the one-liner, I don't rob people, but I have no scruples murdering them and burying their bodies and taking money, and you think that's funny like we do, I think you'll probably like this game. If you don't like that idea, then what's the point?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for watching our third review. Have a great day.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.